It is tough to have a meeting when the Warriors are in a playoff game. Yes, exactly. But that being said, it is a fantastic event that we are going to be having tonight, and we're lucky to have it being videotaped so that this will not only be for posterity purposes, but we're going to be able to have the whole community, both the business and residential community, take a look at this in the future. So I really want to thank the Water District for using such forethought. You certainly couldn't have predicted the Warrior game, but being able to get it on tape is a great thing. From the City Council, we have Davina Hurt in the back of the room, and I hope that everybody has an opportunity to meet with her. After the presentation, there's going to be some refreshments, and I think that'll be some opportunity for us to socialize. The Warriors game is on in the other room, so we'll be able to go ahead and see that. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Matt Zuka, and if he could please come up and start his part of the presentation. Thank you, Matt, very much for doing this.
I'm not sure I deserve any applause yet. Wait until the end of the presentation, maybe. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. Good one. This is the board that I get to work with. It's lovely. But no, actually, we're very excited, and thank you to the Chamber for co-hosting this event. We think that with water where it is in the state of California right now, it was a timely time to have a State of the District address where we could provide some background on the regional water system, how we get our water in the district, and then also talk a little bit about our current status of our water supplies, what you might expect going forward in terms of conservation, that kind of thing from us, as well as some information about the district and the finances and who we are and how we operate. So a little bit about myself is I've been on the board since 2006. I'm an engineer by training, and I actually practice in the water sector. So this is a lot of what I do professionally. I enjoy doing this during the day and then volunteer my time, obviously, for the most part, with the board after hours kind of thing. So anyway, hopefully you enjoy this. I've tried to set this up in such a way where we will be able to work the presenter, talk a little bit about Hetch Hetchy, the history, because I think that this is something that not a lot of people understand. It's a turn on the tap, we get water, and that's great, and we want to keep it that way. But there is a history going back to the pre-1906 earthquake that we'll talk about that is really relevant to the discussions that we're having today. So on that front, I have a little video here that hopefully you guys will enjoy. It's about 4 minutes, so if you can just bear with it.
Historically, water has played as central a role in the development of the San Francisco Bay Area as gold itself. With the gold rush, San Francisco grew almost overnight from a frontier town to a bustling city of 40,000. Water was in short supply and unreliable, transported by mules and sold on the streets by the bucket. Between 1849 and 1856, the city burned to the ground at least 6 times. The 1906 earthquake shattered water mains in seconds. Within hours, much of the city was engulfed in flames. Determined never to let San Francisco burn again, the city rebuilt, and the challenge of the day was for the city to develop its own reliable municipal water system. Surveys by city engineers determined Hetch Hetchy Valley, just inside Yosemite.
Just to pause it right there for a second, and I'll find it back, put it back on again. The interesting thing that I wanted to point out with respect to Hetch Hetchy and the you might have heard the Save Hetch Hetchy effort, and that was a great example of what it looks like, what Hetch Hetchy, the dammed area looks like when you compare it to Yosemite.
Yosemite National Park was the optimal site for a reservoir. After many years of debate, Congress passed the Raker Act in 1913. San Francisco's city engineer, Michael O'Shaughnessy, was chosen to lead the project. His mission was to build a monumental public works program that would supply high-quality, reliable water and clean hydropower to San Francisco and cities around the bay for decades to come. The reservoir site was completely inaccessible, so the first thing he did was build a road, followed by a 56-mile railway system, carting men and supplies for the 20 years that construction lasted. The O'Shaughnessy Dam was the world's tallest ever constructed at its time. The Coast Range Tunnel was the world's longest tunnel. O'Shaughnessy was building an engineering marvel to rival the Golden Gate Bridge, also under construction at the same time. Through World War I, the Hetch Hetchy project crossed the Great Central Valley, while the Great Depression brought the nation to a standstill. Amidst a faltering economy, one of the country's largest and most complicated public works projects kept many employed. In 1934, Sierra water arrived at Crystal Springs Reservoir through the Pulgas Temple amidst cheers of thousands. Notably absent was Michael O'Shaughnessy, who died just 2 weeks before his final engineering masterpiece brought its first water to the Bay Area, 167 miles from its source. And for the past 70 years, O'Shaughnessy's legacy has been the lifeblood for a growing and thriving Bay Area. A pure granite base, 460 miles of watershed, and high-elevation snowmelt ensure some of America's highest quality drinking water for 2.4 million people in more than 30 Bay Area communities. From the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, water travels 70 miles through granite tunnels. Dropping thousands of feet, it powers turbines at 3 electrical generation stations, which together produce the equivalent energy of 39 million gallons of oil each year. Bay Area Hetch Hetchy water is blended with local water through 6,000 miles of mains. For 7 decades, it has sustained a growing population and supported the world's most dynamic economy. The Bay Area is what it is today because of the vision of great men like O'Shaughnessy. The system has never shut down for a single day in 7 decades. Our responsibility today is to repair the system, an aging infrastructure in the middle of a seismically active region. In 2002, San Francisco voters approved bond authority to seismically renovate and repair the system. The Water System Improvement Program will upgrade the system with new technology, seismically retrofit aging reservoirs, tunnels, pipelines, and dams, and bring the system into modern compliance with improved security. In 2004, the first local project broke ground.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting video just to highlight the history of Hetch Hetchy, how far back it goes. We don't recognize or realize, I think, often that this area in San Francisco in general, that the infrastructure that was created to actually support and build this area, we have literally pipelines that come from the Sierras all the way over here by gravity, generate power, and goes back to congressional acts that happened in the 30s, and those are still what drive some of our water policy here in the Bay Area today. The Raker Act, for example, still governs how we're allowed to distribute water and who is able to get water within the Bay Area and sets a lot of our rights to the water itself. So that dates back quite a long way, and I thought that video would be hopefully informative and useful in terms of providing that context. This is the Spring Valley Water Company. This is sort of the example of the pre-Hetch Hetchy era where they had water from across the bay still, and you can sort of see the foothills, the coast, Alameda in this area in the bay. That was the transmission system at that point in time. This is another map. Again, if you look at the dates on these, they're great. This is 1929 is the date on this, and up here, this is the elevation drop you have from all the way up at Hetch Hetchy. And Yosemite, and it goes all the way across the Central Valley. Here's the Bay Area, and provides us with water, all by gravity, not a single pump. Generates power along the way. So it's really, as they said, an engineering masterpiece. The fact that they're able to do this, there's no other system that operates this way. Just to show a couple of pictures that I think are if you ever have a chance, or you can take tours up there. It's a great place to visit and see what the water looks like and the reservoir itself. A picture of O'Shaughnessy Dam today. And then this is sort of a different schematic of what it looks like, right? How do you get the water? What is it? What are the steps along the way to deliver water to the Bay Area? We have all the way up here, we have Hetch Hetchy itself. There are other sources of water as well. We have Lake Lloyd, Lake Eleanor, and it brings it all the way through. Again, here's the San Joaquin Valley. There's some power plants. We have the Sonol Valley area, Calaveras Dam, other sources of water that actually also feed into us, not just Hetch Hetchy. And then all of it eventually comes across the bay. The Crystal Springs and San Andreas reservoirs are sort of basins where they will bring extra water to be able to store. And then they can pull it out up here at the Harry Tracy Water Treatment Plant, and that's another place where they can actually pull the water out and deliver that north to San Francisco. So it's a very complicated system. There's thousands of miles of pipeline in the area just to get water here. A lot of people may not understand actually how many agencies and cities San Francisco serves. There is an association of 28 agencies and cities called BOSQA, or they're represented by the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. And every colored agency city on that map is actually buys water from San Francisco. So the 2.4 million is all the way from Hayward, all the way around the Bay, San Jose, all of the peninsula, everybody in that area buys water directly from San Francisco. It is a very large group of people, and a lot of us, other people like us, are also solely reliant on San Francisco water. So we don't have any other sources of water, especially when you go north up towards San Bruno and then down south. We really, in this area, don't have anything other than San Francisco as our water supply. So as was sort of just talked, it serves 27 wholesale customers. It's quite a number of people. The distribution system, 22.4 million people are served off of this. That is all the way from Hayward, all the way through Santa Clara Valley Water District area, and then all the way up into San Francisco and including San Francisco. The Hetch Hetchy components, some of the major ones, are 46 years old. Crystal Springs, the dam that you see right here, it predates Hetch Hetchy. I had a photo that I didn't include that shows the Silver Springs Water District Board of Directors sitting in front of the wooden framework that was used to build that dam. So it in particular is quite old. And the ones that we're worried about when we talk about the facility renovation and improving the reliability are not so much these, but they're the ones that go along the 167 miles from the dam to here, where any sort of failure could create potential problems in our water supply. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The main avenue of failure historically of concern has been seismic, as you can imagine. The 1906 earthquake, as you saw there, was devastating. It's what was the start of the whole Raker Act and getting water and getting Hetch Hetchy and providing water to the Bay Area. So recently, in the early 2000s, studies were done on the vulnerability of the Hetch Hetchy system to a seismic event, and how long would the Bay Area be out of water? How would it affect us here if all of a sudden we did have a major earthquake along the Hayward or the San Andreas Fault? So I'm going to show a video here real quick, a short one, that kind of gives you an illustration of what we're talking about when we say earthquake, because I don't think we really have a lot of sense sometimes in terms of the scale of earthquakes that we're dealing with and what they look like. So if you look on the top left corner and over on the right, this is the 1906 earthquake. So what you'll see here is sort of the shaking intensity on the ground from the 1906 earthquake in color code, red being the worst. And on the bottom left is a Loma Prieta earthquake. That was a 6.8 magnitude versus a 6.9 versus a 7.8 magnitude earthquake. When you look at the these earthquakes are starting at exactly the same time. 1906 is the top left and the right, and Loma Prieta is on the bottom left. So you can see what the difference is between an earthquake and an earthquake. When we talk about the Richter scale being logarithmic, in other words, it's non-linear, that's what logarithmic means. Loma Prieta actually released 3% of the energy that the 1906 earthquake did. So how badly did it shake then? Multiply it by a factor, and that's what you would get in the 1906 earthquake. So as you can imagine, something like this happening, especially because the 1906 earthquake was shallow, it wasn't deep like the Loma Prieta, it created a lot of ground movement. would be particularly devastating to the water system. And it was studied and identified that the regional water system needed to be repaired. Some of the results of the study really identified how long we could be without water. This is, again, sort of goes back to the early 2000s when the study was done, and as before the bonds that were mentioned that San Francisco passed. But as you can see here, the green line represents how many days people could be 100% completely out of water in this area, in San Mateo, pre the improvements program that's been going on since the early 2000s. And how long it would take to get fully restored water. So we're talking 60 days before everybody has water, 20 days without water. That sounds like, well, I don't, 20 days of not drinking, but this is also 20 days of not showering and flushing the toilet and all the other emergency, sort of the necessities. So drinking the water and the drinking water is actually, when we talk about this kind of a devastation, is a small component of the things that we worry about when we're dealing with the water system itself. So really it's health and safety services. We want to have and be able to provide a minimum level of water during and post an event like that, because it is a health and safety issue. Emergency, our operations, as a district and the operations in general. And then also the commercial and industrial customers. The way it's prioritized right now is that the first effort is to get water back to residences, and then the second effort is to get water back to the commercial and industrial. But when it's out for 20 days and you're 60 days out without having water back to everybody, and commercial and industrials last, that's a long time. So there was a lot of money in the bonds that were spent by San Francisco to actually improve the reliability of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But this was the economic estimate back in $2005 as to what a San Andreas Fault earthquake would result in and a Hayward Fault earthquake in terms of economic loss. Back at that time, I know Intel, and I'm not sure if they're doing this right now, they were using 1 million gallons a day of water. And they particularly like San Francisco water because it's such high quality that it really did not require them to treat it very much. So you take Intel and you take them out of business for 20 days, and what kind of economic impact does that have? And that's what was being, that was basically one of the consequences of the outage. So I want to talk a little bit now about we call it the WSIP. This is the Water System Improvement Program. This is the program that San Francisco has been implementing. It was supposed to be finished in 2015. They're still working on it. It'll be hopefully done soon. But go through some of the projects, what they're intended to cover, so you get a sense of the scale of the improvements program that has been put in place so far. It's $4.8 billion, and that is in, I think, 2005 dollars. I think costs are going up. And it is really focusing on the entire regional water system. So it goes all the way back up to the Hetch Hetchy, as well as up and down the peninsula. There are more than 75 projects have been completed. It was scheduled to be done at the end of 2015. It looks now like it's going to be 2018-ish before they finish the last of the projects. And the scope of this is huge, so you can imagine some of these things with environmental review and whatnot would have potentially slipped. So from 20 days out of water, what are we talking about now? The proposed level of the level of service goals, we call them LOS, for the system for Hetch Hetchy when they're done with the WSIP in 2018, basically are to deliver minimum system demands. So this is like your winter indoor minimum demands within 24 hours. That is sort of the minimum goal, the target they're trying to shoot. We're out of water for a day. Then that is going to happen equally to the East-South Bay Peninsula, all the customers. There's no prioritization of zone or location. The WSIP was designed to actually take that into account and make sure that the water could be restored to all equally. And that within 30 days, we'll be able to basically go back to average day demand. So this would be a springtime demand. We're not going to be watering our lawns at that point, but you're going to get most of the water that you would need and normally be able to use. So in 2018, this will be the level of service. 2020 days out of service with an earthquake, and then under the same scenario, basically back within 24 hours for at least the minimum uses. So I'm just going to cover a few of the projects. There's obviously a ton of them. These are just kind of interesting ones, I think, that are A, close, and B, are also give a sense of the scale of what it is, of the work that they're actually doing. This is the Hayward Fault Crossing. Obviously, it's crossing a fault. It's a $67 million project, and they're trying to figure out how do you actually make a rigid pipe cross a seismic slip fault without breaking. So kind of an interesting concept and what they did. So here, this is a movable box with a pipe inside of it. They are dropping segments of pipe into it. You can sort of see the size of these things. And those are the rigid sections so as that box moves, basically that pipe can move within and take a certain amount of slippage. So that was $67 million worth of work. This one I think is actually great. You can see you'll recognize this as the Dumbarton Bridge. This is Beta Vision's pipelines 1 and 2. These were the ones that were originally put out there. That old train trellis looking thing that you see when you're driving on the Dumbarton Bridge is actually the pipes that bring water to the Bay Area. So obviously they're old. I think there was a picture in the video where it showed them building them in the early parts of the development of Hetch Hetchy. And the idea is to build a tunnel to basically replace Beta Vision pipelines 1 and 2. So when you look at how this was done, a few pictures during construction, these are the shafts to get in and dig the tunnels, and the boring machine dropping pipe into the tunnel, and that goes all the way across the bay. So very large project, lasted years, but a massive component of our ability and the city, San Francisco's ability to continue to provide us with water. Crystal Springs Dam improvements. I'm sure you all know where that is. This had to be retrofitted in order to actually restore Crystal Springs to its full storage capacity, because Department of Safety and Dams had downrated it, said they couldn't store all the water that they wanted to within that, so they had to retrofit it in order to accomplish that. Some pictures during construction of this. This is at the base. This is what they call the stilling well. One of the pump stations. Some concrete formwork going on in the middle of the night. Gives you a sense of what's going on and how these projects lay out. So quite a substantial, you can sort of envision $5 billion somewhere in here being spent when you talk about the scale project, which I think is relevant. So what does this mean? So not only have we talked about the reliability of the water supply, and obviously I think how critical it is to all of us, but everybody's having to pay their fair share of it. So it's not that San Francisco is paying the sole cost and that's it and we get the benefit from it. All of the Bosco agencies that I mentioned are also paying their proportional share of the cost, and it's basically based upon your consumption. So you pay a fee for the water that you use, and the more water you use, the more that goes to paying the debt burden on the WSIP. So, but what that means is San Francisco rates to us, what we buy our water at, have doubled. In the past 5 years, have gone up 2 times, including a 28% rate increase as of July 1st last year. It's actually not an uncommon thing. San Francisco tries to balance its books every year, and at the end of every year, in June of every year, we get a little surprise as to it's more than we expected or less than we expected, and it varies. So those costs come straight through to us. So this is our history. This is what we look at when we look at the district's costs. This is what we have paid San Francisco historically for per unit of water. And when we go out back, you can see what a unit actually looks like. It's 748 gallons. When I joined the board, we were down about $1.30. And right now, with this next rate increase in 2015, we're running at about $4.22. So that's a huge jump. This is all to pay for basically the ongoing operations of the system, as well as the actual capital improvements program that San Francisco is going through right now, that they'll finish here shortly. These projections, they are estimates at best. They look at when they think they're going to have projects finish and when they're going to need money. So when you see a decrease in a rate from 422 to 414, in their math and calculus somewhere, a project is ending and they have less cash going out, so therefore they should be able to drop their wholesale rates. What we've found historically is, in particular, if you look at this area right here where it dropped from 293 to 280, they regretted that and went up to 332 the next year because, again, the way the cash flow went. So we do have to take up a lot of that rate increase. It's a big part of our budget, and we have to balance that out. And so the last year, for 2015-16 and going forward, this was sort of our 5-year rate increase plan to accommodate that. The 28% from San Francisco was a big hit in 1 year to take, so we'll talk a little bit about our proportional costs for buying water and other things. But that resulted in an 18% rate increase for us to absorb almost a 30% rate increase from San Francisco. We anticipate smaller rate increases going forward. We're in the middle right now of looking at our budget and what rates need to be. But the idea at that time was based on San Francisco's projections, which hopefully are accurate, that we would be able to keep up with our costs and their increases in cost at about a 6% per year. And this, I know, sounds kind of like you're sort of double dipping, but those who conserve more water pay less. Even though rates are going up, it sounds kind of like it's contradictory, but that's the flip side of what we have to worry about too, which is as water conservation happens, which it has substantially, the district makes less money and the revenue goes down. So we have sort of that happening on both sides. I'm going to talk a little bit right now about our CIP program at the district. We have just finished a master plan, have identified a number of projects that are sort of essential to the district to not only are we going to rely on San Francisco hardening their system, but we also want to make sure that our system, we're getting rid of and changing out the older mains. All of our large infrastructure is new enough so that we are comfortable with it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Oops, I actually didn't change the slide. That was supposed to be 20, my bad. All of our big infrastructure is actually not that old. It's within the oldest is within the 20 to 25 year time horizon. It's certainly not at the end of its useful life. On average, it's about 12. These are our big ticket, big pump stations and whatnot. What we really have a lot of work to do on is the mains. We've got lots and lots and lots of linear feet of main, and we want to get ahead of that, get caught up on it. It's a little bit like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. These mains have a useful life, and they're 50 years and some of them more in the ground, and you've got to keep going, or you end up with main breaks, property damage, and that kind of thing. Or when in an earthquake, we could have outages in that. So our goal right now with this program is to start tackling the $50 million that have been identified as the backlog, if you will, of CIP projects. We're not going to do that in a year. It's going to take some time. But those have all been identified, and that's sort of the cost of what we've identified as necessary for the district. Right now, we're in the middle of discussions. I'll talk a little bit about our finances, but right now we are a pay-as-you-go system. We have no debt. Every year we balance our books. Do we want to stay that way, and how do you actually finance $50 million worth of bonds on a year-over-year basis? Do we actually want to do some sort of debt financing for a $25 million, half of it, or some different amount? And then what does that get us, and how do we continue to pay that forward to future ratepayers, and what's the benefit for the system, and how much more reliable do we make it right now? So that's an ongoing discussion that's happening at our meetings today. To give you a sense, and the gray is a little bit hard to see, I apologize, but these are the locations of the identified projects. The red is not the priority of it. They're color-coded by zone, so if you live in the area that's red, don't fret, it's okay. But you can see they're sort of all throughout the district. We have quite a number of them, and this is the 5-year look ahead. So if we were going to build this about $25 million worth of projects right here, it's not all of them, but this is sort of how they scatter around the zones and what they look like. So our effort here and our goal is to coordinate with the city as much as possible to make sure that these projects happen as concurrently and as efficiently as possible, so that we're not going out and touching infrastructure more than we have to. So water supplies. What do our water supplies look like right now? We're in the middle of a drought. We're in the middle of an El Nino year. Which is it, right? Is it one, the other, or both? And the answer pretty much is it's still basically the same, in all honesty. So when you look at this chart, I apologize for the resolution. The blue line is the wettest year on record, 1983. If you guys were around, anybody was around that year, it was substantial. The red line is 1977. That's the single driest year on record itself. So you can see that right now, 2015 was not that much better, and we are the red line, with the black line being the median for each year. So we're not there yet. We're better than median, but it's not a stellar year by any stretch of the imagination from a water supply standpoint. When we go look at snowpack, and snowpack is our biggest reservoir. So snowpack is sitting in the Sierras half the summer, slowly melting and giving us water. The more snow we get, the more water we have in storage. So snowpack is a great indicator of what our water supply looks like for a given year. Right now, we started off great, and we are substantially, we're about 80% of our median snowpack value. So when you hear the news of reservoirs overflowing and all that kind of stuff, take that with a grain of salt. They might be overflowing now, but it doesn't mean that we have a huge amount of water sitting behind it coming up. This is the current forecast for the Tuolumne. This is where the majority, 85% of our water comes from. So we have the other sources that I talked about. Those are about 15% of the total water supply. So what you can see here is last year, 2015, is this purple line. It was pretty abysmal. We 50, I think this is in 1,000 acre feet, yeah. When you look at the different lines here, we are currently right now sitting at 293, an estimated 293,000 acre feet available to us for this year. The forecast, at best, is within this blue range, if you will, with the 810 being considered a normal full year. So to recover, we still have we would be at the very, very, very high end of this range to get back to what would be considered normal. So we're still in an El Nino, great rain, thank you, decent snowpack, but we have a long way to go still until we're sure we're back to a place where we're not going to have a drought and that we've reset the clock. What do our annual sales look like? So I've got the supply on one side. What's the consumption look like within the district over the last since 2000? So you can see even before the drought, they were going down substantially. This is largely a factor of just not only conservation, I think, and people understanding the value of water. We also have some economic downturns in this period of time where the commercial industrial uses would have gone down substantially. So what we find in this area in particular is we have a lot of competing influences. When the .com bubble burst, I mean, there was a dip. And then it substantially went down, and then the 2009-2010 was the last economic recession, and then you see a dip there again. Slight rebound, and then we hit the major drought. Fourth consecutive dry year, longest on record, longest dry period on record. So we're down 35% since the early part of the turn of the century in terms of consumption of water from the district. Which is a good thing in a certain extent, because if you look at what our available legal supply rights are, what are the water rights that the district carries, this is sort of a comparison of that. So since 2009, this is the variation in our water purchases, so what we basically buy from San Francisco. The supply assurance is the blue line at the top. So that's what we're guaranteed from San Francisco in a normal year. In a non-normal year, all bets are off. At that point, we're dealing with what water we have available. So in a normal year, we're well below what we would have and consider to be our water right, the supplies that are available. The interim supply allocation is sort of an interim target between now and 2018. That will go away in 2018. It really doesn't restrict our water. It really is more a financing issue. And in a drought, if it were to happen today, which it already is, but if we were to take if we were to go down the formal drought declaration process with San Francisco, it's called Tier 2, the orange line would be sort of our allocation. So we're doing really well with conservation. The district has really stepped up. We have the statewide goals, but in terms of what we would be obligated to do otherwise, we're also doing quite well in that respect. But we also had conservation targets. So Jerry Brown was very generous in his executive orders over the last 2 years in terms of how he wanted people to manage their water use. And he passed, half a dozen of them, mandating cutbacks. Everybody had their own targets. Districts and residents were mandated to do certain things. Certain things were prohibited, like watering medians. You were no longer allowed as a city to water a median landscape, which actually had quite an impact on a number of cities. This is the range of cutbacks that were required. We're in Tier 5, as Mid-Peninsula is, and this is based upon what the city's per capita consumption is. That was what set your tier. So as you can see, our per capita was enough to put us at a mandatory 20% cutback. We've by far exceeded that. I think we're in the 30s still, if not the high 20s right now. And for those that weren't compliant, the state board was more than happy to fine you, and they did. So there are some communities that were down in, having to cut back 36%. And interestingly enough, some of them did. I believe Hillsborough was in the 36% category, and they met their target. They did a massive public outreach, and people responded. So it was really good. Then there are some that didn't. I will say that there is a big push right now in the state of California where they're trying to get the state to back off on, because of this great year we've had, they're trying to get the state to back off on these mandatory restrictions and leave it up to the districts and the agencies to be the ones to decide what conservation efforts need to go into place. And it's something that's on the agenda for this next month, which is, do we support that, or are we still thinking that it's appropriate for the state to have some mandatory restrictions in place in order to assist us in managing water consumption? So that's a debate that's happening right now in Sacramento with the state board. To give you a sense also of how the results within, these are the BOSCO agencies. I show Mid-Peninsula Water District, and the red line is the average for BOSCO. The orange bar would be your standard, what you have to achieve. It's kind of a strange graph, because you would think that more going higher is worse, going higher is better. That means we cut back more. So anybody with the blue bar being higher means we achieved our target, and we were about, on a percentage basis, we were about average in terms of how all the BOSCO agencies were able to respond in the cutbacks. But averages can be misleading, because you can see that we were, that's statistics. We were actually quite high in terms of the percentage that we would cut back. And how are we doing this year relative to, for the regional water system? This is the, again, the regional water system being San Francisco. How much water is San Francisco delivering this year compared to historic years? And what you can see on this chart is the 5-year average is in red. So that's the most recent 5 years, where we have the dashed black line would be the requested 10% cutback off of that baseline. So that was the original request back before the executive orders. So you can see that with the blue line in 2015, initially we didn't start off that well, but we hit the summer months, and that's when the irrigation cutback happened, and that's when we started really seeing the results in terms of the conservation. People really stopped irrigating outdoors. Interestingly enough, we're starting off this year in the winter months, and we're well ahead of schedule, and we're well below what we saw last year. So even though it's still quote-unquote winter and the irrigation season, it hasn't started yet, it's probably about to start given the condition of my lawn anyway, we're still running really well below what we were last year, which is great, again, in the context of conservation and meeting the goals that are mandated and set by the state. So a little bit about the finances of the district now. Talked a little bit about the background, our CIP program, the water supply, and our rights as it is associated with our consumption. And then what do we think about when we're talking about our budget? What are the things that we have to balance as a water district that maybe might be unique compared to other agencies? So first of all, it's obviously self-supporting. All of our rates pay for all of our costs. That includes the purchase of water, that includes operations, that includes basically all of our expenses. It's an enterprise fund, effectively. We are not allowed by state law to charge any more than the cost to serve. So that actually has been recently, in fact, there's a fine point put on that even in the courts recently that made it a little bit difficult in terms of how we set our rates, but we were able to do, I think, a pretty good job in making sure we're consistent with that requirement. The rates also have to cover our long term. So not only our O&M, but any capital investments that we make, the rates that we collect every single month have got to be able to cover that, our depreciation, everything. So it's not just month to month for us. If we go spend $1 million, $2 million on a tank, that we have to be able to have the money in the bank, or we have to be able to sell debt in order to be able to do that kind of construction. So when you pay your water bill, it really is us planning over a long horizon in terms of how to actually manage the system. Right now, as I mentioned earlier before, the district has no debt. We don't have any outstanding loans. And all of our, what they call OPEB, which is post-employment benefits, you may have heard about this, where many communities have not been showing on their balance sheet the debt that they have to their retirees in terms of medical that hasn't shown up. Well, there was a law passed that says that now you have to put that liability on your balance sheet. Well, lo and behold, a lot of people don't have that liability funded. So about 6 years ago or so, when this I think came out, the district decided at that point in time that we were going to bite the bullet, and that year start investing towards our employee long-term liabilities. And we had an actuarial analysis done, determined that it was about $180,000 a year starting then to pay forward and meet all of our long-term employment debt. So taking advantage of the time value of money and interest, we decided at that point that that was the time to do it. So I think we can proudly say that we're probably one of the few districts that has that has funded our retirement debt for the employees that we have. So I think we're quite proud of that. Darn it, I said it again. So this is the second time. My apologies. It shows up fine on here. I'll give you the. Give me a second here. There we go. It sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. So you can see the extent of the purchase water cost for us. It's 45% of our annual budget. And as we talked about when we looked at that steep incline curve from San Francisco, when that hits you and it's 45% of your cost, and they, from 1 month to the next, decide that it's going to go from 15 to 30% rate increase, it causes a lot of shuffling on our end to try to adapt to that. Salaries, depreciation of our assets, and basically some of these other our power and other costs. But by and large, between our purchases of water, our employees, and the assets that we have, that is the bulk of our cost, as you can imagine. And we don't have other. There's no. We have a very small amount coming from property taxes. It's almost negligible. So with that, so what are our plans going forward? I talked a little bit about the CIP program. That's something that's immediate and near and dear to our current discussions. But there's a number of things that we think about. I mean, what do we do as a water district? Our future plans really do nothing more than revolve around how we're going to manage our infrastructure, how are we going to manage our water supply, our demands, and our finances. So that's our job. Those are the things that we have to bring together as a board and as staff. The infrastructure we just talked about. We have a CIP program, a 5-year CIP program. Our district engineer did an outstanding job, worked very closely, and developed with all the staff, developed a model that identified where the deficiencies and prioritized them. So that plan is in place right now, and we're working actively on figuring out a way that the board is comfortable with implementation. So those conversations are happening right now. From a water supply standpoint, the Urban Water Management Plan is probably the single most important document that this district prepares. Every 5 years, we're required to prepare one where it maps out the next 20 years of our water supply projections, demands, and so on. So we have to then incorporate growth. We have to incorporate businesses and development. And it's actually a fairly complex document. Every city, every agency in the Bay Area and the state of California has to prepare one. So these are every 5 years. We have one due right now at the end of June. That will be available for public review sometime in the near future, second week in May. So if anybody's interested, we'll have a copy here. There'll be a copy on the website if you're interested in more detail about the water than what I'm providing. The other thing is the San Francisco water map. They're in the process right now of doing a strategic plan of how they are going to potentially change the water supplies and how they allocate them in the future and the relationships amongst the agencies. So one of the issues at stake is right hand is that San Jose and Santa Clara are currently interruptible customers. So they get water, but in the event of an emergency, they can get cut off. The discussion is, do we have enough water within the system? Are we going to have enough water in the system going forward to make them permanent customers? And it's not a trivial amount of water. It's around 9 million gallons a day. So on average, when you think about all of the other Bosco agencies that I identified there, they use a collective total of 184 million gallons per day. It's a big chunk of that water to put in as a permanent customer that is no longer interruptible. So the 184 doesn't go up, but we add 2 users, and that's an interesting discussion to say the least. There is something that was identified in this when we talk about reliability in the WISIP. Mountain Tunnel is a single tunnel coming from Hetch Hetchy, and it had a partial collapse. It is unfortunately also a single point of failure in the system, and San Francisco right now is working fast and furious trying to figure out how extensive the damage is, and they've developed an emergency response plan. Our staff is working with them on that, and we are watching that very closely. We want to see how those repairs go and the extent of the damage and what they're going to do. It's an expensive project that would be in addition to the WISIP if they decide that they have to build a parallel tunnel. So we are eagerly awaiting some good news, hopefully, on that front. Water demands, we continue to encourage conservation. Conservation is one of those things where it's not only, I think, for the general good, it allows the district, and we're putting water, and I think I said this at a presentation at the City Council, the Constitution of California requires the state to use water in accordance with the best and highest use. And as we go forward with conservation, I think that is the goal. We want to continue to do that. We need to adapt to the regulations as they're changing as a district, whether it's more stringent or less stringent, make decisions as a board as to whether or not, even though they are becoming less stringent from a state standpoint, how do we want to implement our conservation program going forward. So once the state decides how they're going to go, then I'm sure those conversations will come up within the district itself. And then finances, with the CIP program, with the increases in costs that we see from a wholesale water standpoint, upwards of 30% in a given year. That's 45% of our total costs. And you saw that over the last 10 years or so, our water consumption has dropped by, I think it was 37%. So try balancing increases in cost of 30% in a year, and you're also dropping your consumption, the amount of water that's used, by 32% over about the equivalent, a year and a half. It makes the finances kind of volatile. And we've been managing that. Staff has done a great job of managing that. But it does put us as a district in the position of having to make sure, again, that we are managing the money in and the expenses very tightly. And it plays into the conversations that we're having about the capital improvements as well. And how do we manage the expenditures on that front? So a lot of competing goals, a lot of things moving around that we all have to pay attention to. So with that, I thank you for your patience. Hopefully that wasn't too long. Hopefully it was somewhat informative and gave you a little bit of background about the regional system, which I personally think is quite fascinating.